Hi, my name's Alondra, and we are here today with our special guest, Alex Hernandez. All right, thank you for joining me today. So I was reading a little bit about you, and I saw that you were born in León, Oaxaca, Mexico, specifically Oaxapan. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you were raised in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Correct.
So, I wanted to ask you, depending on how young you were and like how you remember, how was that transition moving from Mexico to the US?
Well, it's one of those things where you kind of have vague. I mean, I was like 4,
Mhm.
so I kind of have like my memories are. I still have some memories, but I still kind of don't. But I just remember. I just remember being noticing like that we were different and that we would speak a different language at home, and then I don't even I barely remember like learning how to speak English. I have some vague memories, but it's just I just remember feeling like an outsider ever since I was young.
Yeah.
And even going back, I remember thinking like, "Oh, I'm still an outsider." Like never really being able to fit here or there. So it's always kind of been uh, part of me ever since.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I also come from parents that immigrated from Mexico to the US, so it's like kind of that feeling as well. My sister came here when she was also really young, and
Mm,
it's just always I can definitely relate to what you're saying. It's just always felt a little bit different. But yeah, that's thank you for sharing about that.
no problem.
And then in your artwork, you talk a lot about the immigrant experience and like gender expectations, HIV survival, and queer sensibilities in your artwork. Could you expand a little bit on why you feel so passionate about any of these specific topics?
Well, I think like most like most immigrant, I mean like most first generation kids, like I was saying earlier, you never really feel like you fit in, and you kind of feel like I remember going back and like also not fitting in with, cousins or not even understanding some of that culture. I mean, there's some connections, but there's still a lot of and also like I heard a comedian say like, whatever decade your parents moved from, they're still stuck in that decade from the country they were from. And even though that country has changed, they haven't. And so it's kind of like everything my mom taught me was like, from the 80s, you know what I mean? Like so it's and so for a long time, and I think a lot of immigrant kids go through this, they kind of have an identity crisis. And
Mhm.
so it took me a really long time to realize that instead of having I had to pretty much take the good and the bad and the things like, I'm really proud of my culture, but I also understand that, you know, it's still kind of a sexist culture, very macho. So I kind of have to take the good and the bad and kind of have to create my own identity. And so that's why a lot of my work deals with like patchwork,
Mhm.
because I feel like I take a piece of fabric from this and I take a piece of fabric from that to create my own world and my own identity. So that's pretty much I just kind of have to like create my own space and kind of have to kind of like, you know, pretty much be a Frankenstein of all these different things.
Yeah, and like mesh together both worlds of where
Exactly.
yeah, I totally get that. Sometimes it feels the same way. Like for example, I have to write recently I had to write an essay about my identity. And I was kind of like just sitting there and I was like, well, I don't feel Mexican enough sometimes. But then I'm here in the US and it's kind of like I don't feel American either. So I definitely agree with what you're saying that you sometimes have to mix together both the good and the bad. Can you talk a little bit about your patchwork and kind of where you got that style from?
Well, I mean, I grew up in Colorado, and so I was kind of I would see, quilts, and so a little of that influenced me. But also I was also influenced by like punk and like like goth culture. But that's the other thing. I grew up in a small town, so a lot of that was learned through TV or through so I wasn't even really a real goth. I was more like I was more of a like a hot topic, punk.
Mhm.
And so so I kind of put all those things together because I really love the aesthetic of, when people would put patches on things and decorating your denim with patches and it kind of and eventually when I grew up I introduced that into my work because it just felt right and it also felt like it was the only thing that would make sense. Um and using like Mexican fabric and then using like you know Americana fabric to put together like to kind of create this identity of like neither here nor there has kind of played an important role in the aesthetics that I create in my work.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's just kind of, and the thing is, I started out as a painter and I slowly got into textiles, and then it just kind of evolved into what it is now.
Okay.
And yeah, so yeah, I just kind of been pattern has really played a big role in my work, and it kind of like continues to evolve.
Okay, so you said you started with painting and then you moved kind of onto patchwork, right? So did you kind of always not know, but because I know you're also a social worker, right? So like in your Instagram bio, you have social worker during the day and then artist at night. I thought that was pretty clever. Um, but did you kind of like was art always a part of your life, or did it kind of slowly a way you started to express yourself?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, I always wanted to learn how to sew, but my mom didn't. My mom said it was for girls, pretty much.
Mhm.
And that's again where I was talking about the sexist Latin thing. Um, and then I kind of, when I went to undergrad in Denver, I kind of took a fiber class and I really got into it. And then but I slowly like introduced like textiles into my paintings. Like I was adding patchworks and I was adding fabric on paintings or like trying to mix it all. And I was also informed by like Robert Rauschenberg, which is this artist that was like taking quilts or taking found objects and adding them on top of paintings or and so that kind of is where that came from and I realized, oh, I don't have to just paint or do it a certain way. And then eventually I just kind of fell more into textiles because for me it was more when it comes to painting you have a blank canvas so you can paint anything but you have to mix all your colors and what I like about textiles is that you you kind of have to work with what you have. And so the colors are already made. I mean, unless you go into dyeing, but that's not really something that you start off with. Like, you really kind of have to work with what you have. And so that kind of has been one of the things that has helped me in my work is like I have these limited prints, colors, and fabrics. So I have to make them work. And through a lot of trial and error, I kind of realize what works together, what fabrics I like, and then eventually I realize, oh, these are the fabrics that I like to play with.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of, and it's interesting because I recently started spray painting on fabric, and so it's kind of funny that I kind of went back to painting, sort of, but not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I saw in one of your art pieces. Well, I've seen like a couple of them, and it's really cool how you kind of like put all these different patterns together and design one patchwork. And then when I also look at your art, it's kind of reminds me of like my childhood, like my Mexican childhood when I don't know, it just brings back a feeling like a
Well, one thing that I like to do is like we recently started using like found objects like like children bed sheets or like sleeping bags that have like cartoons on them because like well growing up and I think Latinos and other blue collar people do this is like you'll sometimes see yards people leave toys and crap in their yard, you know
yeah,
what I mean, and
yeah,
so for that series that I started I wanted to make it. I started spray painting and doing all these things on top of these things because I like that. When you leave something outside for a long time and the color starts to fade. I was
yeah,
trying to go for that.
yeah,
But also, growing up as a kid, I remember my mom. and other immigrants using like children bed sheets for like other things. Like I remember going visiting someone's like I remember going to a house where there was like 10 immigrants that and you know how people use like a living room. They'll use like a living room as a bedroom, and then they'll use like a Winnie the Pooh like bed sheets as like a divider for you know what I mean,
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
like
I
a wall. And
totally.
so that's kind of like something that I wanted to add into my work too, is like how you know how immigrants use like everyday objects differently than other people or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. It also kind of reminded me of how I think I also saw this on social media somewhere, but how a lot of Latinos or my family specifically sometimes use like the oven to like store stuff. Like
Yeah.
those small things that just kind of are they're like they're not traditions. They're like things that we just kind of do
What's
that
kind of like recycling, well, like
yeah.
Mexicans using like, a top of butter
Yeah.
to put salsa or beans in after it's
Yeah.
not, after the butter is gone, you reuse that plastic container.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. Okay, well that yeah, that's super interesting. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel that your art is making an impact in your community or the people that you share your art with?
Well, I like to create. I mean, the thing is that I would say that I try to use like visual coding in my work in the sense that like, some of the patterns and some of the materials that I like are very specific to me or very specific to the community. But I also understand that people have other preconception or preconceived notions of like we could both take a look at a pattern and it would mean totally something different to somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's why I try to leave my work to be up and to sometimes it's a little vague because I want people, like, people are not always gonna get the same thing out of it, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also, like, a lot of the figurative work that I do is also a little reminiscent of, like, when you go to San Francisco and you see homeless people in the street and you see, like, a leg coming out, because and that's also because, my social work, I have to work in that environment, and
Mhm.
so, like, it's just like, people don't notice that until I tell them, and then people realize. So it's just kinda like it's an interesting process, and it's just kind of there's a lot of interpretation in my work, and that's what I kinda like about it, is that everybody can take a different interpretation of things that I'm making.
Yeah, like a different approach to seeing
Yes,
things differently. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I think that's like something really cool about art that you can make it like seem one thing, but then someone will see it totally different and will see like
Mhm.
something beautiful or special or unique in it that maybe you didn't see before. So I just think
Exactly.
that's super like cool about art in general. I'm not a super like I like art and everything, but I'm not like I don't know too much about it. So yeah. Yeah. But
It's
I'm
fine.
trying to. I'm learning. So recently, I think you mentioned it, but maybe not. There was a recent series you started. It was called, I believe, Staying Positive. Was that
Mhm.
correct? Okay. So could you talk a little bit about that project?
Well, I got a grant to make a series of portraits about Latinos and other people of color living with HIV. Um, and also like just how a- and because being positive is also like a different type of identity, so I wanted to like kind of show that. And so not only that, but I feel like there's so much working in the social work that because I also worked with like HIV positive youth. I
Mhm.
And a lot of these youth like kind of have, they watch movies and they hear about things that happened in the 80s and 90s, and it's all about death. It's all about like
Yeah.
people with HIV dying.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to like, and also like I've seen other work about that, and it's just like we're not in that decade anymore. We kind of It's a lot easier to manage now than it was, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's even, it's easier to manage than like diabetes now.
Mhm.
because there's only just one pill, and if you just take care of yourself, you'll be fine. And so I wanted to show a series of people who are living with HIV, but that are thriving and or like really in like really big parts of their community. Like for example, one of the people that I captured was Mondo from Project Runaway because he was able to take that identity and make patterns out of it for his for his fashion. And so I wanted to show like people living with HIV, like living their best life, like not dying, like being happy, and like just kind of showing people that you can this is not a death sentence and you can really it's just an aspect of your life, but it doesn't have to control you. And so I wanted to create work that was like very positive. I mean, not no pun intended, but like, some positive aspects about, living with this condition. And so I really wanted to capture that. And also, I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to do people of color and is because when you also see all that stuff in the 80s and 90s, it's usually gay white men. And so I wanted to show this other aspect that people don't get to see much
Yeah.
because there's certain, and also to talk about how there's still a lot of stigma and some education needed in some of these communities because they still like some Latinos still believe that it's a death sentence. And so I wanted to kind of like destigmatize some of those things
Mhm.
in this body of work. And also like, and it also adds another layer to some of the things that I'm talking about, identity
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sometimes, well, working with Until There's a Cure, there's a lot of education that goes on with HIV, but a lot of times I don't see much artwork relating to it. So it was
Mhm.
really cool to see some of your artwork and see how it kind of highlights on people living with HIV and kind of shedding a light on that, on the destigmatization, how you said, and that was just really cool to see. Yeah, that was a really cool project. Um, so what do you think that society and the world are sometimes ignorant about and very easily dismiss HIV in general?
Well, I think that I mean, well, I think that also the way that it's I mean, when like, for example, like, people still make movies about the '80s and '90s, and I think that I think we need other forms of representation
Mhm.
because, like, I know Pose is great, but and other things that or movies that have come out are great, and I know these things, are based on real events that happen, but I think that we also need some positive views on that, um, because, like, people I mean, that's why people still think that, it's a death sentence, and I think that even though and, like, I don't even really remember I remember in school hearing about how to prevent it,
Yeah.
like, it's all like, "Oh, like, no sex, blah, blah, blah," but there was nothing else taught about it or how nothing scientific, nothing, like I don't know if they just want to scare us to, like, think, like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people use scare tactics,
Yeah.
um and so I don't know, it's just kind of I mean, I think slowly, like, people are not as I mean, I think younger people now are a little bit more educated about it, but it's still like, older people are sometimes harder to, like, educate if in certain communities because they're too busy working or doing other things. So it's just kind of I don't know. I don't know how to I think the only way that people really learn about it is like if you're related to somebody who may be positive. I
Yeah.
think that's the only people that I've really learned that really get it. But it's kind of a hard I wouldn't know how to like that's I mean I think it starts with like the education system,
Yeah.
but I don't know how it's just so complicated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's just also like one of those topics that it's not like you're gonna start talking about it in like the dinner table. It's
Right.
it's kind of like HIV and AIDS has always had like a negative connotation, and that's exactly what we're trying to change. But I think I definitely agree with you that I think, yeah, older people, but also like in general, media and everything, sometimes how they portray people living with HIV and AIDS. But yeah, working with like Until and organizations like this is, I think, very important as well to like try to educate others and ourselves too, because like you said, the education system in school, they just teach us to use condoms and abstinence, and that's basically it. They don't really teach you anything else. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. So do you want to talk about a little bit about how working with Until, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but how working with Until has kind of like helped you learn a little bit more about HIV or just made a difference in your life?
Well, I mean, I've been able to like, come up with some designs and post for them, and so they've been pretty helpful because I mean, I thought about, you know, designing for other things too, and so they kind of like let me start out here, so that's great. But also I've learned so much about like that people are still I'm glad that people are still, fighting for research, and for other things. And to also give people voices about I kind of would call this like kind of a ghost community sometimes because it's kind of like we're here, but we're kind of
Yeah.
ghosts like lurking in the shadows or something. And
Mhm.
so yeah, they've really been able to like not also that, but like I've also been able to see like how nonprofits, are able to talk about things. And also when I help some of the posts, like they've helped me realize, that the design elements are a little different than like art because you kind of have to be more direct. And also like every little thing matters because I remember designing like a post where people look like they were celebrating, and then I realized it probably wasn't appropriate for that post
Oh,
necessarily.
yeah.
So it's always kind of, I mean, so I've been able to like do some trial and error with them.
Mhm.
And also to see how an organization works, and how they help with, research money,
Yeah.
or also like they also do a lot of like what's it called? Like they also talk a lot about like women living with HIV, which I think is something that people don't normally talk about.
Mhm.
Um, because I think people still think that it's still like a gay disease, but it's really not. It's
No.
more complicated than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many intersections between HIV and like socioeconomic status, sometimes even race. So there's just like a lot to learn, yeah. And I definitely get the when you said that you learned how to make posts, because I remember as well that there was, to me it looked fine and I was like, "Oh, that doesn't look insulting." But then you learn that there's certain things that you can't just put because that could be insulting in some way. So yeah.
Well, because it can be interpreted differently, and
Yeah.
that's something that I had to learn too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, I just wanted to really quickly ask you, so you work as a social worker. I didn't read that so much about it specifically, so I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about what you do as a social worker.
Well, I work for Larkin Street, which is like it's in San Francisco, and it's to help youth, at risk youth kind of find stability.
Mhm.
And I started working with they have a HIV program, but then I changed to an LGBTQ um, program where we kind of help like homeless youth because like a lot actually I don't have the numbers now, but
Mhm.
there's a large portion of LGBT homeless in the city because there's a lot of runaways and a lot of, and
Mm,
so I mean that's kind of where I kind of moved towards. And I was a case manager last year, but I stepped down, so
mhm.
I'm just a residential counselor now, because it was just too there's just not enough support.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
Especially during the pandemic. And so I still pretty much do the same thing. I assist people that are at risk for, drug addiction and other things, and I kind of um try to help them guide them in the right direction, or at least kind of let them know that they have choices.
Mhm.
Because I think that's one thing that I realized in other places, that like when you tell people what to do, they're not going to do it. You have to like kind of let them know what the consequences and the choices can lead them to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, yeah. But I'm actually kind of at the moment, I'm actually looking to see, and that's actually one of the reasons that I started to do an internship at Until There's a Cure, because I'm kind of looking to get out of it, like maybe. And it being I'm not in that level of being an artist where I can just, live off of that yet,
Yeah.
but I wanna change, and I wanted to maybe see about getting into design, or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I'm doing this, internship too, because it's just social work is so hard,
Yeah.
and after doing it for 7 years, I just, like, I need a change, and I think I've contributed a lot.
Mhm.
And so I think it's okay to like let other people with more patience and, new blood to like go in, because it's not a job that you can do like forever, because it can be really draining and very like, I mean, there's some great things about it, but eventually it just kind of there's a lot of emotional drainage that comes with the work.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine. I mean, it's a lot that you probably see and go through, not even like personally, but things you see, and I can
Yeah.
imagine that it can be extremely draining and
Well,
yeah.
a lot of people don't talk about like vicarious trauma, like, like you can be traumatized by other people's trauma as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's also something that people of color need to learn too.
Mhm.
I think that like we also like, especially in immigrant communities, you'll see a lot of crazy stuff,
Yeah.
and you don't think that it affects you until like much later.
Mhm.
Or like, because you see people going through some rough times, and then you don't know how to process that, and then it kind of stays with you. And
Yeah.
so like, I think, and also something like therapy is important to talk about, especially because Latinos don't believe in it a lot of times. They
Yeah.
think that like you only go to that if you're crazy. But
Yeah.
I don't think that I don't think that people realize like it's okay to like go to someone and talk about things, and it actually helps you get all this stuff out.
Yeah, yeah. Like they sometimes I don't know if it's just probably the culture that comes with it, but they don't believe in like depression or anxiety or any of that. It's kind of just dismissed and be like, "You'll be fine," or whatever.
If you
So
clean the house, you'll be fine.
yeah, yeah, you'll be fine. Go. Yeah,
Right.
I totally get that. Okay. Well, it was thank you so much for doing this interview. I think
No
that
problem.
questions. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything at all?
No, I think we talked a pretty was pretty broad, so
Yeah.
I'm glad we got this.
Okay, so just to close this interview off, I wanted to ask if there is a quote or saying or words of wisdom that you live by.
Um, I can't think about it right now, but I mean, I guess treat people like the way you want to be treated
Yeah.
is always a good one.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
also, I mean, I guess I can't think about it right now.
Right, that came out of nowhere. It was
Yeah, exactly. No,
so,
it's just that it's such a loaded question. But I mean,
or maybe like if you want to talk about um a
I
life
mean,
lesson that you had to learn the hard way or anything.
I think that one thing that I've learned as an artist, that a lot of people, and I think especially young people, is that like don't be afraid of failure. And that's something that I learned. Like don't be afraid to like mess things up, because you learn from those things. And so I don't think there's a real quote, but like, like try, I mean, just trying and trying again will eventually help you find um what, the answer, because there's so many times where I wanted to quit being an artist because it's just so hard. And so, but I just kept trying and trying, and then eventually and this is, I mean, somebody once, and there's even moments where I compared myself to other artists,
Mhm.
and then somebody told me like, yeah, like, you're not at the level that some of these people are, but you're on a level that other people wish they were at. So
Yeah.
don't give yourself credit, and also like all the failure that I've done has actually led me to where I am today. But also, like, you learn a lot of stuff, and I think that's a lot of things that like I think a lot of young people like want instant gratification, and they want,
Mhm.
I know they want to help the world and all this stuff, but it also like you have to be ready to, be exhausted, or, be ready to fight, because and you have to be ready to be disappointed,
Mhm.
because um and sometimes you don't get, sometimes the things that you wish could happen don't happen, and it
Mhm.
just takes a lot of failing and then getting up again to like kind of keep going.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that. That's really good. That's really good piece of advice. I might take that on myself. Sometimes, like, we see failure and oh, especially, well, personally for me, I fail at something and then I get discouraged and then it's kind of like, oh, well, that sucks. And then sometimes with pieces of advice, they say, oh, just stay positive and everything will turn out fine. And then it doesn't. And then you're like, okay. Yeah.
No, no, I mean, and it's okay to feel, you can feel like, you can feel discouraged, or you can feel like, oh, that like take it as like a lesson,
Mhm.
instead of a instead of like something that's gonna stop you.
You're probably gonna fail like 3 or 4 times and it's gonna take you 10 times the work
But
of someone else.
but each time you're gonna learn something, like how to not do it, or maybe how to approach it a different way. And
Mhm.
that's something that like I've learned a lot
Yeah.
from, actually.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's really good to hear. Okay. Well, thank you so much for those last words and for
No
the interview.
problem. It was
Uh,
nice to chat with you.
yeah, it was nice to chat with you. I hope to talk to you soon again.
Okay, take
Thank
care.
you.